daughter may not at the moment always get angry and defensive. What she does is a little more surreptitious, a little more subtle, sneaky. She trashes them on social media. Or she'll talk them down to anybody who will listen, and it will get back to Allison. That's going to be a casualty of taking care of this little baby. If the daughter gets to the point where she feels mom and dad are going to do this, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything. I can just lounge around and while away my hours on the phone or whatever else I choose to do because mom and dad are going to make sure the baby's taken care of. The parents are stuck. They really are. What are they going to do? They can say you have to get your own apartment. And they can say, we hope and pray once she's out on her own, she'll take care of this baby. And if they think that's going to happen, then they act. But only they know their daughter. Only they know the chances of that. And if they say that's no way going to happen, then they're saying we're raising this child and her mother is along for the ride. At least until some point where something changes. Whether the daughter meets some guy, this happens a lot, and then moves in with him, or the daughter gets a decent job, and the parents say, all right, we got several options here. One, we're going to charge you rent, or two, we're going to help you $300 a month for an apartment, and we'll babysit the baby during the day, or we'll watch the baby, or now it'll be a toddler, or maybe even a preschooler, while you work. They can still keep a very close watch on the upbringing of this child, even as their daughter lives in her own place. All those things will unfold with time because it's rare. I haven't seen it very often where this circumstance begins with the birth of a little baby and an irresponsible parent who moves back in with her own parents, and 10 years later, this is still going on. No, usually the circumstances in some way shift. I'm Dr. Ray.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
If you have sustained conversation with non-Catholic Christians, one of the things that always comes up about you as a Catholic is, why do you confess to a priest? Why would you go to a priest when you can go straight to God? I would say, well, look, I went to Jesus, I looked at his word, and it told me to go to a priest. It is interesting. One of the first things you notice right towards the end of the Gospel of John, that Jesus himself determined to forgive and retain sins through human intermediaries. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. And Jesus commissioned his apostles on earth to speak in his name, to forgive sins or retain sins, not just metaphorically, but metaphysically.
This week, we honor the visionary life and work of Al Cresta on EWTN and Ave Maria Radio.
This program brought to you in part by the town of Ave Maria, Florida.
Ave Maria, a big kind of small town. A golf cart-friendly, ride-your-bike-everywhere kind of town with something for everyone. Resort-style amenities, 2 golf courses, shopping, and dining in our town center. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at the core of the community and a wide range of homes to meet your family's needs. Visitors are welcome. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. Ave Maria, a big kind of small town.
Not enough time left for another e-person. although I certainly enjoy pondering the calls as they come in. And like anything else, we don't do therapy here, but many of these would be time you could spend in a therapeutic session to explore much more therapeutically the situation. Here's a quote from Lewis. He says, and now this harkens back to calls I get about people being very negative and frustrated over the condition of our society. And in some ways that stretches to the condition of the world as they see it, because only the news media can now bring the condition of the world into your living room or wherever it is you watch your television or your computer or social media. Lewis says, the second coming of Christ is the medicine our condition especially needs. In Advent, we say, "Come, Lord Jesus." I ponder a lot what it would be like to be alive at the second coming of Christ. How would that be? Would he manifest himself everywhere so that throughout every corner of the globe — globes don't have corners, but, speaking metaphorically, throughout every corner of the globe, would he be present and there? Or would he come back one way, just as Christ, glorified body, and it would be such an event that within minutes, hour at most, pretty much all of the world would know he's here? And then what? St. Paul says that we would rise to meet him, those who are believers, those who are his followers would rise to meet him like a conquering king coming back. First time he came around, he kind of kept a low profile. Even so much as saying, "Hey, don't tell people you think I'm the Messiah." He didn't want things to get complicated before the right time. But the second time, there's going to be no doubt. And I'm wondering, all the folks, and at least it looks like at this point in our world, the majority, don't believe who he was. He was either a great man or a good teacher or didn't exist, but he just certainly wasn't God. What would be their immediate reaction to having this, without doubt, being presented to them? As a psychologist, I'd like to be around to study some of those reactions, but I think other things are going to happen. Thank you for joining me. Dr. Ray Goretti, program doctor, is in. Thanks, Andrew Kruchek, for all you do over there as my producer man, board operator, and call editor. Walk with God. You may come back,
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. The Doctor is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
All Catholic, all the time. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.
Are you aware that the devil has a plan for your marriage just as God does? He has no desire for the success of your marriage. He doesn't want the two of you to help each other get to heaven, but instead he instigates each of you to lead the other straight to hell through self-centeredness, materialism, and apathy. Jeremiah gives us God's plan, saying, "For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for harm."
Hey, I'm Keith Downey, the host of Morning Joy, heard right here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. With the Holy Spirit as our guide, we are on the highway to heaven together. We have regular contributors to the program like Alan Smith talking about Archbishop Fulton Sheen, singer-songwriter, radio host Julie Carrick, and Thinking Out Loud with Dave Palmer. And the team keeps growing. Join us at 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern each weekday right here on your Catholic radio station. Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.
Hello, I am Wesley Steppish, a member of Mother Day Parish in Irving and sponsor here at KATH 910 AM. I am owner of Absolute Painting. We serve customers throughout at the DFW Metroplex for both commercial and residential painting projects, both interior and exterior, along with many other projects, large and small. I welcome the opportunity to prepare the estimate for your next project. You can find us at absoluteptg.com or by phone at 972-375-5100.
What was I going to do with a baby?
I was too young to be a mother.
They said I had a choice.
The timing was all wrong.
I had hopes and dreams for my life.
They said it would be the best thing for me to do.
So why do I regret my decision every single day?
Where did all of my hopes and dreams go?
I've never felt so alone.
Why won't the shame go away?
They said it would be easy. It isn't.
Are you suffering from a past abortion? If you are, you may feel alone, but you're not. There are people who understand and can help. Call 214-544-CARE or go to racheldallas.org.
Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth. Catholic radio for your soul on the Guadalupe Radio Network in North Texas. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone. Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
Welcome to the Back to the Father program here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. I'm Dave Palmer, back after a long break. It's been 4 weeks since I have hosted this program. I'm surprised I'm actually allowed to come back because I've heard that Cecil did a pretty darn good job. In fact, I did tune in one time from Ireland and watched it briefly. So here we are, Back to the Father, and I want to get a little synopsis of the last 3 weeks. Cecil, how did it go? Did you get some feedback? How did you pick the topic to talk about? I know you did Corpus Christi, I think the first Friday, right? And what were the other ones?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm back in my rightful place. This is it was fun, but I enjoy.
Now, if I said that would have sounded pretty bad. She's back in her rightful place. You know, she's back on the other side of the glass.
Very happy to say this myself. I enjoyed hosting for a bit, but it is nothing better than sitting in your own seat.
Yeah.
I think the first week was actually Memorial Day weekend, and so we talked about recreation, what St. Thomas Aquinas says about leisure and recreation. Specifically, there was kind of a tie-in with recreation and leisure, and then we did Corpus Christi, and then we did the Sacred Heart, which I'm not going to lie, Dave, by the end of it, I was finding very loose strands to Aquinas and just talking about what I wanted to talk about.
Did you actually go into the Summa and give any excerpts or anything like that?
Again, as we went on, it got looser and looser. The first week, very much in the Summa. The second week, it was more about Aquinas and his writings, what he did for the Corpus Christi liturgy. He wrote the music for it, or wrote the songs, I should say. And so that was kind of the tie-in. The last week, very loose, because he was not alive when the Sacred Heart devotion took off.
So you're
stretching. But he did, in his commentary on the Psalms, He did write that he thought that the heart of Jesus was the scriptures. And so we did have a tie-in, a little baby tie-in. Joe and I were joking, and Joe's like, you're the substitute. You're allowed to do what you want.
So if you hosted the show this week, just how far would you? You'd probably be talking about like Batman
I'd be talking,
something.
yeah, I really, really would be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe it was a good time for me to come back.
Yeah, no, it was great. Because honestly, every single week, I thought, I'm not doing Back to the Father this week. I have no idea what to talk about. I've got zero, zilch, nothing.
So you thought about just calling it off?
Every single week. Pretty much Thursday afternoon, I was like, I got nothing. We're not doing anything. But thankfully, Thursday nights is when my young adults meet, and I was preparing formation class stuff for that. So ended up tying it in.
And then you had a topic. Okay.
Then I had a topic.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you very much for doing that. I really didn't know you were going to do it even one week, but to kind of keep that continuity going and have a show the last 3 weeks, is pretty cool. All right. Well, this is a program, if you're new to it or if you're watching live, we are on YouTube, we're on Facebook, I believe we're on Rumble, Instagram, we're on Twitter, X. So a lot of different platforms. This is a program that only goes on social media. We're not allowed on the radio, so this is just social media. And we focus on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologia, sometimes a little more loosely than others, but
depending on who's hosting.
Today is going to be pretty much right out of the Summa, but it's going to be an interesting program because I'm not going to go in depth on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you questions he asks about the Eucharist, okay? And I want to forewarn you that in the first few minutes of this program, you might possibly feel like you're being judged, okay? So
everyone instantly left the stream, Dave.
So I don't mean it that way, but I do want to challenge you a little bit because I want you to go back. Now, Sissel's a bit of an anomaly because she's not a cradle Catholic, so she didn't have the seventh grade First Communion class where she received, was taught about the Eucharist for the first time. I did inquire into our volunteer Teresita a moment ago because she's a cradle Catholic. She's about my age or so, and I asked her about when she was first taught about transubstantiation, the Eucharist, as a child. And even today, I think, I don't know, we take the teaching on faith that what looks like bread and wine is actually Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, which I think is a great thing. Okay, we should trust Jesus. Jesus said in sacred scripture, the church tells us that this is the case. And that's all good and well. We should believe it. I've never doubted, seriously, I've asked questions and all that. But I guess what I want to ask you is, do you ever ask questions about it? Do you ever have a healthy sense of curiosity about the probably the most fundamental mystery, that and the Trinity are the biggest the mysteries of our Christian faith, and they both in some ways seem to defy logic. How can you have three persons in one essence, three persons, one being? It doesn't seem to make sense. The other one is transubstantiation. How can I look at something that looks exactly like bread and wine and really believe that this is Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity? And do you ever ask questions? Do you ever just say, okay, I'll believe that on faith, but I got a few questions. Okay, I want to know this, A, B, C, and D. All right, so I'm going to put Sissel on the judgment seat and say, Sissel, because here's the truth of the matter, okay? There's 11 questions in the Summa. Now, it's kind of confusing because questions in the Summa have what are called articles, okay? And articles are questions, okay? So when I say there's 11 questions and there's 84 articles, really what that means is Thomas asked 84 questions. Okay, it's confusing, but there's 11 questions in the Summa. Each question has articles, and each article is a question. Okay, I'm sorry. I know this is confusing. So, but let's just leave it. Let's just suffice it to say that there are 84 articles in the Summa where St. Thomas Aquinas is asking questions about the Eucharist. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, St. Thomas Aquinas asks 84 questions about the Eucharist. And so my very judgy, finger pointed at you, dear listener, dear Sissel, question is, do you ever ask questions about transubstantiation? You accept it, you believe it, but do you ever say like, whoa, hold on.
To myself or like out loud?
Well, yeah, to yourself. I mean, you're not like, or to other people, okay? And the reason I ask this is that a lot of people think that philosophy is, kind of ridiculous because let's just take, for example, David Hume. He doubted causality, okay? So David Hume had this interesting teaching that said, okay, just because the sun, we've observed the sun rising every single day of our life, and we presume that tomorrow morning the sun is going to rise. But he would say, no, we can't believe that for certainty because we don't see the causation between the sunrise. Okay, and people would say that's ridiculous, that's stupid, it just sounds dumb. Okay, but David Hume had a huge impact on Immanuel Kant, and Immanuel Kant had a huge impact on Hegel, who had impact on Marx. And so the point is, if we don't take these questions seriously and we just say, oh, that's ridiculous, it's dumb, there's ramifications. Okay, so I guess my challenge and my judgmental question is, do you ask enough questions? Okay, and when it comes to the Eucharist, do you ever step back and say, okay, I believe it on faith. Okay, I'm going to trust Jesus, I'm going to trust God, and I'm by no means asking anybody to doubt it or to call it into question. But what I'm saying is, do you ever, just say, well, yeah, okay, I believe it, but let me just ask some questions, that curiosity questions that come up about the Holy Eucharist. Okay, that's the question. All right. So Thomas Aquinas asked 84 questions, and in this program, we're going to go over 10 of the questions. Some of them are very practical. Some of them are going to be kind of head scratchers, and you're going to think, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. That I don't know why he would even think of that. But nonetheless, St. Thomas Aquinas had a huge devotion to the Eucharist. The other thing, and I brought this up on Keith's show the other day, that I find interesting is that we know that at one point Thomas Aquinas stopped writing the Summa, okay? And he had a vision of Jesus, an ecstatic vision of Jesus, and a mystical experience, I should say. And he decided at that point that based on what he had experienced in his mystical experience with Jesus, he no longer wanted to write about it because everything he wrote, he said, was like straw. But did you realize that the last full section of the Summa that he wrote was on the Eucharist? Okay, so he wrote, the whole Summa. He got to the third part on Jesus Christ, the Incarnation, the Blessed Mother, the life of Jesus, the miracles, and all this kind of good stuff. Then he goes into the sacraments. He writes on baptism. He writes on confirmation. He writes on the Eucharist. And then he starts confession, and he stops about 5 questions into the confession. So the last question that he completed was the Eucharist. And so I just wonder if his very, very intense, questioning and contemplation and reflection on the Eucharist is what brought about this mystical experience. Okay, just a thought. Okay, so, and maybe if we were to take a cue from St. Thomas Aquinas, who asked 84 questions about the Eucharist, and spent more time pondering it, would that perhaps help us? And, Cecil's involved in a young adult group, and they sit around and they talk about a lot of things and, topics related to the faith. Maybe we should just talk about the Eucharist, because the truth is Thomas Aquinas could have written one article about the Eucharist and just said, hey, does the bread and wine substantially turn into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus? He could have said, yes, we accept it on faith, and it's a truth of our church, and it's a heresy not to believe it. Let's move on to the next thing. But he didn't do that. He wanted to ask questions. He wanted to dig deeper and really kind of pull the layers back on the onion of this great mystery that we call transubstantiation. And I think we should do the same. So I think it'd be a really long show if we went over 84 questions. But
Dave's like, I'm going to come back swinging all 84.
Yeah, 84 of them. I thought about doing a YouTube video with all 84, but I don't think anybody would last through about 5
You'd have to do 30 seconds for each or something. You'd have to make them like the supercut version.
And then that's why, in this one, on some of these, I'm not even going to get Thomas's answer because, quite frankly, the answer is kind of complicated. But I want to get your thoughts on just the question itself. And so the only person I can see right now is Sissel. So Sissel's on the hot seat, and you kind of tell me like, oh, that's kind of weird. That's, it's interesting. Yeah, that's a pretty legitimate question, that kind of thing. So, all right.
I just have to give a reaction. Okay, I can do that.
So,
So
the next slide you see up there shows what looks like a goldfish in a bowl. All right. Do you see that one?
Uh-huh.
All right. So what if you came over to my house or my office, and I had this on my desk in my office, and I said, oh, have you met my pet dog? Right? And you would look at it and you'd say, whoa, you're crazy. That's not a dog. That's a goldfish, right? And I said, no, truly, it's a dog. I promise you. This is my pet dog. Okay. Now, I'm making a ridiculous comparison, but that's basically what we do every Sunday at Mass. We're shown something that looks exactly like bread and wine, and we're being told that it's the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, okay? And again, I'm not trying to put anybody to doubt this, because I believe it wholeheartedly, but, I think what you would do is if you came in my office and I said, this is my pet dog, you would at least start asking some questions. Like you might say, I'll give you a couple examples. You might say, does it bark? Like it looks like a goldfish, but if it's a dog, does it bark?
I like that you think that might be the first question. One of my first questions would be, are you in therapy?
Right, exactly. Yeah, but now what if you really trusted me? Be like, we trust Jesus Christ. We trust the church to believe that what looks like bread and wine is really the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. And what if you just said, you know what, I trust Dave so much that I'm just going to believe that this truly is a dog.
Okay.
Okay, but you wouldn't walk away. You would look at it and you'd say, whoa, that looks like a goldfish. Okay, so if this is a dog, okay, A, B, C, D, and E, and F. Okay, what questions would pop into your mind? I bet you there would be some. Do you have to take it out for a walk? Can you put a leash around it? Does it bark? Does it eat dog food or goldfish food? Whatever. Okay, does it growl? These kind of things. You would have some questions. Even if you believed it to be true, you would probably still have some questions. Okay, so having said that, what questions might you have about the Eucharist now that I have been so judgmental about all of us just, accepting the truth of what we believe on faith, and you look at the bread and you look at the wine and you believe, as I believe, that it truly is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, does that not still allow us to say, okay, but within that paradigm of belief, I have some questions. Okay, I want to dig a little deeper. And the last thing I'll say before we go on to the first of the 10 questions that St. Thomas Aquinas, the most interesting ones, at least for me, is, we all read the book by Matthew Kelly for our last Share-a-thon, and he starts off that book, 33 Days to Eucharistic Glory, talking about the great crisis in the church and how, I guess, 2/3 of people, Catholics, don't even believe in the real presence of Jesus Christ. Might some more of these conversations help out? I mean, because maybe it's not enough just to say you don't have enough faith. You don't believe because you don't have enough faith. That may be true, and I think we believe because we have faith. But is there not a element of reason where you can just at least kind of dig through some of the questions and ask more questions, and maybe that would allow you to, if nothing else, think more, ponder more, take it to you. Maybe you just say, I got so many questions, I'm just going to go to adoration and just sit, on these questions that I have about the Eucharist because I'm so fascinated by it. What drove Carlo Acutis to be so fascinated at a young age about the Blessed Sacrament, about Eucharistic miracles? He was asking questions, I guarantee you. Okay, how can what looks like bread and wine, turn into the flesh of Jesus? Why does it not happen often and more often? Why does it happen at all? Why is there a geographical distribution of where these Eucharistic miracles are? I'm sure he's asking these kind of questions, right? And so, do you ask the questions? All right? Do I ask enough questions? Okay. St. Thomas Aquinas asked a lot of questions. So here's the first one. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so this is, you see in parentheses here, ST 3-75-3. Okay, Summa Theologia, part 3, which is the Tertia Pars, question 75, article 3. All right, so like I said, there's 11 questions in the Summa with 84 articles, and this is one article. Okay, so now here's the question. Okay, and so you're gonna be the one that tells me if this is just ridiculous, or as one of my high school students said one time, he said, I think St. Thomas Aquinas has too much time in his hands. And is this just Aquinas with too much time in his hands, or is this St. Thomas Aquinas so absolutely fascinated with the Eucharist that he can't help but ask questions? And the other thing, to take St. Thomas Aquinas off the hook a little bit, he wasn't the only person that asked these questions. I think in the Middle Ages, there was an atmosphere of inquiry. There was an atmosphere that I don't think really exists today. Maybe on college campuses, maybe in some quarters, there are a lot of people that are just kind of wrestling with this stuff. I've always kind of had this dream of like being at one of those like Paris cafes or something, and you're sitting out and you're sipping on wine and you're just talking to people and just kind of talking about life. And that's really what philosophy is all about. It's just looking out the world and asking questions. That's what it's about. Okay. All right. So here's the question: whether the substance of the bread or wine is annihilated after the consecration of this sacrament or dissolved into their original matter. Does the question itself make any sense?
First off, let me make sure that we have the understanding of the question, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
Please.
So basically, it's saying that, consecration happens in Mass. It becomes body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. After Mass, does it go back to being bread and wine? Is that what it's asking?
I don't think so.
Oh, then I'm so glad I asked.
No, I apprapprate the question. See,
you're
asking,
wanted me to ask a question.
No, I'll tell you what I think it means.
Okay.
And then, it may be that you're like, no, Dave, I think you're wrong. So you're asking questions. That's a good thing. So
Okay,
I feel so good. Okay, well, let me reread it. Whether the substance of the bread or wine is annihilated after the consecration of this sacrament or dissolved into the original matter. So I think here's what he's saying is that, every physical thing has basically form and matter, substance and matter, right? So this phone right here would have the substance, of a phone, right? Mm-hmm. If at all, let's say I somehow was able to proclaim words over it and it turns into a banana, right? And so now it looks like a phone, but it's actually a banana. I think what Thomas is saying is, what happened to the phone substance? Like, because did it get annihilated? Because it was there at one point.
So it's basically, is the bread and wine substance still present?
Like where to go?
Oh.
I think that's what he's asking. Like what happened to it? Like, if it was there and then now it's not there and now it's Jesus, what happened to it? What did it get annihilated? And then when he says did it get dissolved in the original matter, that's kind of geeky and that's kind of interesting, and we won't go to did it just dissolve? I mean, Does anybody want to comment out there? Is that the kind of question that somebody out there? I know I'm starting with a doozy, okay? And there's one of these, by the way, that I'm going to have to go over kind of quickly because it's a little weird, a little gross. But I'm just going to read it and then say, we'll move on. Okay.
I have concerns.
How's that for a teaser, right?
That's great.
Okay. Anybody out there watching right now, don't be bashful. Say, Thomas, too much time in his hands. Interesting. Weird. Okay. The only thing you can't deny is that St. Thomas Aquinas was spending time contemplating about the Eucharist. Okay, so let's just kind of let that one sit. I'm not going to necessarily give the answers to this, but he's saying, okay, there was a substance at one point of bread and wine. Now it's no longer there. What happened to the substance? Okay. Okay. I think it's a legitimate question. I think it's something that we should all ponder. Okay. The next one, this one is interesting. Okay. So question 75, Article 8, whether this proposition is false. The body of Christ is made out of bread.
Wait.
I mean, think about that. If you said that the body of Christ is made out of bread, I bet you most people would say false. I don't think that's true. Okay, because that sounds weird. The body of Christ is made out of bread.
I am confused. What does he mean by the body of Christ is made out of bread? Like,
yeah, in the Eucharist. It doesn't mean like when Jesus walked around, he was like the bread man.
He wasn't wheat bread. Wheat bread.
Yeah, like walking around his bread. But he's talking about that, and again, this is where he throws the question out there. And of course, he's going to spend, 5 paragraphs, kind of dissecting this every way possible. But if you just take it at face value, is that under any circumstances a true statement? And he is going to argue yes, that you can say the body of Christ is made out of bread. But it's because the accidents of the bread remain, and it's kind of complicated. But look. Remember, I told you I wasn't going to give you the answers. I'm just going to tell you. I'm going to ask you the question and then give you a quick thing. Okay. So then the next one didn't get any easier. Okay. Great. So he says here, whether Christ's body is in this sacrament movably. And I think what he means by this is that, like, as the host is moved, because we know that the host gets moved across the church and, goes from the priest's hand into the person's tongue or the person's hand, right? It moves around. So I think what he's asking here is, like, does that mean, like, Jesus is moving around? Is Jesus being, because if he's in this sacrament, is he moving? Would it be accurate to say that Jesus is moving across the altar? And he comes to the conclusion that, like, no, not really. Okay. But again, not a lot of explanation, but
just a lot of frustration. No explanations, just frustrations.
Do you find this frustrating?
A little bit.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, again, just kind of, just say, hey, he's asking questions. And anyways, no comments yet on any of the formats. But I'd love for somebody out there just be daring and say, you know what? This is kind of interesting, or this is kind of weird, or I don't know if I'm buying this or not. Okay, next one. This is interesting because we talked about Carlo Aquinas a moment ago and Eucharistic miracles. Question to 76, Article 8 shows that Thomas was interested in Eucharistic miracles because he asks whether Christ's body is truly there when flesh or a child appears miraculously in this sacrament. So if you were looking at the Blessed Sacrament in adoration, and let's just say, for argument's sake, all of a sudden you see the face of a child. And there must have been a case back in the Middle Ages when that happened. Otherwise, have you ever heard of anything like that when you see a face?
I've not heard of the face, but you were just talking about Aquinas, really being interested in that. It's interesting. I did cover in the show we did about Corpus Christi that obviously he had something to do with that feast day. But I was getting conflicting sources, but it sounded like there was this Eucharistic miracle that took place right around that time.
Okay.
That kind of prompted the Pope to want to have this feast day of the Corpus Christi. And there's, again, conflicting sources, but some people are saying that Aquinas himself visited it too because he was very fascinated by it and wanted to help confirm whether or not
the Eucharistic miracle.
Yes.
I wonder, and I'm glad you added that. Thank you. And I wonder if it had to do with a face.
Now I got to look it up. Hold on.
Because when he says or child appears
right, that's so specific.
It's so specific that you've got to think. And I've read this. I've read the corpus of this article. I haven't read all the objections and the answers to the objections, but I wonder if he refers specifically to a particular case. I don't know if he does or not. But but I think what he's saying here is that if you have the Blessed Sacrament, which is, the real presence of Jesus Christ, and then all of a sudden there's like a face on there, or it's a child's face, or there's something else, or you have a Eucharistic miracle, is it still Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity, or did something change, or that kind of thing? Again, I wonder if Carlo Acutis asked these kind of questions, because Carlo Acutis clearly had a very a fascination with Eucharistic miracles. They are very fascinating. And here's a legitimate question, because how they say that when you have a Eucharistic miracle, it's almost always heart muscle.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe this is what he's getting at, is that if that is heart muscle, well, how can that be the entire Jesus? Because it seems like it only turned into like one part of him, you know what I mean? Like if that's heart muscle, well, what about his tongue or his foot or his leg or his head or his eyes, What about his soul? I mean, I think that's what he's getting at here, is that okay, is it still all Jesus? If there's a miracle?
It's only part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, the just for the record, it's the Eucharistic miracle of Bolsenia.
Bolsenia,
okay. Yeah. And it doesn't say anything about a face. It just says that it started bleeding. It was a priest who was celebrating Mass, and he was a very devout priest, but he was having some struggles with believing in the Eucharist, and started bleeding in his hands. So.
And that happened in the 13th century?
Yep.
Okay.
1263.
Okay. Now, that's interesting, because, Thomas died in 1274, so most certainly this would have been...
he knew about it, for sure. Whether or not he actually physically went there himself, he knew about it because, again, the Pope that made the Feast of Corpus Christi a feast day, he was impacted by that miracle to make it. So he definitely was aware of
All right. Okay. And that's what you found out when you did your research for that particular show. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I like how all the shows are kind of blending into each other. Okay. So if you're just joining us, we are talking about the 10 most interesting questions that St. Thomas Aquinas asks about the Eucharist in the Summa Theologia. So after you finish these 10, you can say, wow, there's 74 more. Give me more. These are the ones that I just found to be the most interesting. Okay, some of them are like the very first one is the Eucharist a sacrament?
Right.
Okay, that's the one, and that's not really interesting because that's but he has to kind of ask that question because
got to set the ground rules.
And then there's one does the substance change at consecration? And we know that it does. And do the accidents change? No, they don't. That kind of thing. I'm just asking the most common ones. All right, so the next one is very practical, and I'm gonna turn this one to Sissel and you, our listeners. If you're out there and you want to, let us know what you think about this one. It says whether the effect of this sacrament is hindered by venial sin. Okay, so the effect of the sacrament would be what it does for you. We receive grace, sanctifying grace, and so if we come to receiving the sacrament, we have venial sin, does it affect us? What
Question.
do you think?
Though, at that point, though, you've already been in Mass, and we have at the beginning where we can make that general confession of our sins. And isn't that supposed to venial sins are not supposed to no longer supposed to be making it
Well, I've heard I've heard that holy water can remove venial sins. I think it's a truth of the faith that when you receive the Eucharist, your venial sins.
That's what I thought. Okay,
yeah,
so
I'm not sure about the confiteor you're talking about.
So it couldn't hinder your venial sin. Couldn't hinder then.
Now, so you think?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Every time I think I know anything, I don't.
No. You're right. You're partially right. Is that not only do venial sins not hinder the reception of the Eucharist, but the Eucharist abolishes venial sins. But he does make one distinction. He says if you come to receive the Eucharist and you are distracted, okay, and you are distracted by something, like maybe, a guy sees a pretty girl or a girl sees a handsome guy, or you're distracted by, something at the moment you receive. Okay, that distraction could hinder. Now, it doesn't abolish like the sanctifying grace you get, but he says it could have a hindering impact on the totality of the blessings and the graces that God had planned for you to receive in the Eucharist. Okay, so that's the distinction. Okay, now this next one I found really interesting, and this is the one that I'm going to kind of go over kind of quickly because it's kind of gross and it's kind of weird. But I just want to point out the fact that Thomas asked this question. Okay, and then I'm just going to move on. And he says whether the seminal loss that occurs during sleep hinders anyone from receiving this sacrament. Okay, and I'll just say that. The one thing he does mention here is he says if there's any fault on the part of the person for why it happens, he even says sometimes they can have a demonic reason for it happening. And obviously, if there's a demonic element, it's not your fault. But it does kind of highlight the fact that there's a certain disposition that we might bring physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually to receiving the Eucharist. Okay. Next one. This is another one that I think would be somewhat controversial today, and I'm not so sure that Thomas's teaching still would be the teaching of the Church, because he asks in question 80, Article 9, whether those who have not the use of reason ought to receive the sacrament. So if somebody is born and they're in some kind of, let's just say hypothetically, in some kind of vegetative state, they don't have the use of reason, should they receive the Eucharist? What would you think as an answer to this one, Sissel?
I imagine it would have to be a case-by-case basis in what we're talking about by, like, because you get to be talking about, there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of people with, as you know, for special needs and stuff like that, you know, maybe still have a very beautiful spirit about them. There's obviously always going to be a child of God. So I don't know. I think it kind of depends. I don't know if there's one a set thing.
Yeah, no, you know, and again, I think today we have a greater a broader understanding of reason. Like there are some people who seem to be maybe comatose. They may be, you know, really intellectually compromised. Maybe they're nonverbal, but there's still a lot going on inside their head. I know as a father of an autistic child, I know there are a lot of nonverbal children who appear to be very, you know, stupid, I guess you could say, imbecilic, but really there's a whole lot going on, right? Now, Thomas comes down and says if somebody doesn't have the use of reason, okay, they should not receive the Eucharist, okay, because he said they can't have a devotion to the Eucharist. They can't really believe in it unless they have the use of reason. But then he goes on and says, well, what about somebody who had the use of reason and then they lose it? Okay, maybe they get into a car accident and they're in a comatose state. And then he says, well, while they're in a state of lacking reason, they shouldn't, but at the end of their life, right before they die, they should receive it, right? Like one last time, like viaticum, before they receive it. So anyways, it's an interesting question. Like if you have somebody in your life that does not have the use of reason, and maybe he's also referring to, we don't allow, in most cases, children, 3-year-olds to receive the Eucharist. Why? Because they haven't gotten to the age of reason yet. But then in the Eastern Church, they do give all the introductory sacraments to babies, including the Eucharist, including confirmation even. So again, it's not across the board. It's different, right? Okay. Any thoughts on that? Any comments?
Yeah, we do have some thoughts. Scott has commented on YouTube. He said, I'm going to guess that he says no regarding this last question, but I think you're right about today's belief. And he says it seems a bit contradictory.
Is he talking about the use of reason?
Yes.
Okay, what's contradictory about it?
I don't know. He's going to have to specify because I didn't see exactly when the comment came in.
Okay, I'm going to guess that he says no, but I think you're right about today's belief. Okay, I think that's about the broader understanding of it. I think, maybe you give people the benefit of the doubt that maybe there's more going on, people who are in a coma.
That's the thing is that we're not able to know a lot of things. So it's kind of hard. We could be prohibiting someone who maybe really could benefit from having the Eucharist, but we all can benefit from having the Eucharist without knowing. So
yeah, but you should believe in the Eucharist to receive
Sure.
it. That's that's another question. Is that if in fact 2/3 of the Catholics in the country don't believe in the real presence, should they even be receiving it in the first place?
Right.
Is like acknowledgement that, because the word amen means so be it.
Yeah,
right?
so be it. I'm
he
agreeing
says,
with this.
Yeah. So the body of Christ, amen. So be it. I believe in this, right? So why would you say that if it's a lie? You're forcing a person into a lie if you give them the Eucharist and they don't believe it. I'd love to, this would be a great question to raise to a priest, is that, what if a priest were to say, if you don't believe this is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ,
Don't receive today.
Please don't come up, because I'm putting you in a position where you're going to have to lie, right?
We have a couple more
Okay.
comments. Scott says, well, first he asked, can we really say a child age 7 can truly comprehend, the real presence? And then also, I think he's following up with what he was saying about contradictory, not allowing it until death is imminent.
Okay. That seems contradictory, because then you're kind of breaking the rule that you
Yeah,
said.
you're just like, well, let's make sure we cover our bases in case we maybe messed up.
Yeah, right. Well, go ahead and just cover your bases throughout the whole life. So, all right, Scott. Well, thank you for the comments, and we appreciate everybody. We know there's a few of you also who are watching and remaining very quiet. And I can't imagine that this is a topic that you've like, I got no thoughts on this. I just have no opinions. I think, so if you want to, we don't know who you are. We know you're out there, as I like to say during share-a-thons. We know you're out there. In fact, I have more certainty that you're out there now than
he sees a number.
Yeah, because I see a number. When I'm on the radio, we're doing share-a-thons, and I say I know you're out there. I don't know you're out there, but I know you're out there. And so let's hear who you are, where you're from. Don't be bashful. And so thanks for the for watching. And all right, so we've got a few more. And the next one is, and Cecil, you tell me whether or not we've talked about this before, because I find this to be a very intriguing question. And this one, is a little bit more, straightforward. Is that Jesus at the Last Supper turned bread and wine into his body and his blood, soul, and divinity, and then he proceeded to give it to his apostles and then eat it himself. And so Thomas says, did he eat his own body and blood? Okay, so Jesus would, by definition, have basically made himself a cannibal, right? Because he would have eaten his own body and blood under the species of bread and wine, under the accidents of bread and wine. And that'd be a great question. Was that cannibalistic? I guess technically, yeah, but it's not, anyways, you understand. So do you think he ate his own body and blood? According to St. Thomas Aquinas?
According to what St. Thomas Aquinas? No, I'm going to say, because I don't know.
I was hoping you'd get one right.
Oh, come on. Okay, I'm just going to go. I'm going to leave.
Yeah, just leave. That's the best way for you not to get any more wrong.
Yes,
right?
is that I just stop.
You may not get any right, but you're not going to get any more wrong if you do that. So, no, I mean, it makes sense. You'd have to, if he didn't receive his own body and blood, well, then you'd have to then conclude, and this is where you kind of get into, okay, what's called a, when you have propositional statements, like the first one would be Jesus turned bread and wine into the body and blood, into his own body and blood at the Last Supper. Okay, that's proposition 1. Proposition 2 is Jesus consumed that at the Last Supper, and then the third would have to be, well, then Jesus consumed his own body, right?
Got it.
And so syllogism, I think that's called, a syllogism.
Yes.
And so, yeah, Thomas says, yeah, I think he did. Yeah, he did consume his own body and blood, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so there's 8. 2 more to go, and this one says, now this one I think is pretty interesting. Okay, it's one of the longer ones as far as word count, but I want to see if I know, Cecil, you're probably not feeling great about yourself because you've had a few swings and misses, but this is the one that
I wouldn't say it's a swing so much as a little punt.
Okay, so let me ask you if this makes sense. Whether if this sacrament had been reserved in a pyx, you know what a pyx is, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or consecrated at the moment of Christ's death by one of the apostles, Christ himself would have died there.
In the Eucharist, like like would you mean? Okay, so they reserved Eucharist.
This is really, to me, this is probably the most interesting one that he asks, because remember, there could not be a mass during the 3 days that Jesus was dead. Right? Because his body and his soul were separated, so you didn't have the person of Jesus Christ during that time, right? His body and his soul were separated. His soul went down to Hades. His body remained in the tomb, right? So I think what he's asking, and this is really, really Aquinas geeking out, because after he rose again and his body and his soul reunited again, then you can have a mass because you have a body. Now, when Jesus was on earth celebrating the Last Supper, you had Jesus Christ, body, soul and divinity all together. But what he's saying is like that. He's talking like that very moment when Jesus died on the cross. If one of his apostles had been saying a mass, which would have been a little weird because he'd be like there at Calvary, celebrating a mass, would Jesus have died there? And I think the other question with this is, when we receive the Eucharist, do we receive Jesus's body, his alive body, or his dead body? And I think we realize it's an alive body, right? Mm-hmm. And it's if you read this article, it's quite interesting because he goes into like, are we receiving the body that was like whipped and scorned and the nails were driven through and spat at, or are we receiving the body that lived and breathed? And he makes this distinction between. It's interesting. I'm sorry. I don't know. I find this stuff interesting. Okay, and apparently Aquinas does as well. Okay. So that's that. Okay. Are there any comments on that? And does this? And honestly, does this make you, dear listener, dear viewer, say like, I want to go read that article because it's pretty interesting, or does it be like, I just want to go back to when I was 7 and my teacher told me this and I just believed it on faith and I don't doubt this. I don't ask a lot of questions. I could see you going either way with this, okay? I tend to be more the first, where it's kind of like, these are interesting questions. Thomas is it's very a lot of curiosity questions that he's asking about right now. All right, let's move on. Are you ready for the last one?
You're
so probably ready
ready
for the last one about 30 minutes ago, weren't you? Okay, this is another very practical one. Oh. Okay, he says, whether the Mass of a sinful priest is of less worth than the Mass of a good priest. Now you're saying,
do I have a chance to get this right?
Oh, this is your last chance. Now, Thomas almost always says, well, in one way, yes, in one way, no. Okay, now you're thinking like, why is this in the section on the Eucharist? He didn't say anything about the Eucharist, but the reason this is in the part about the Eucharist is that he asked the question before whether a sinful priest can consecrate the Eucharist, okay? And I think the answer to that is yes, okay?
So I was going to say the answer to this is that no, it's not less. Am I right or wrong again? Did I get it wrong?
Well, really okay, you're mostly right, okay?
Okay, I'll take 75%.
But what he does in this question is he says, okay, the priest is in persona Christi, okay? The priest doesn't consecrate the Eucharist on his own. And he also, when he offers up the Mass, he's offering up the Mass on behalf of the church, okay? It's not Father John or Father Fred or Father Scott who's all, he in one way he's offering up the Mass, but he's really doing it on behalf of the church. But the reason Thomas asked this question is that they're also, just like, Sissel can go to a Mass and offer up prayers for her friend or for, whatever, her parents or her mother who passed away. And I could do the same. Okay, that's a personal prayer. And the priest can offer personal prayers during the Mass as well. And Thomas says those personal prayers that the priest offers will be more efficacious if the priest is a good priest rather than a sinful priest. Okay, those will be more efficacious. But the consecration of the Eucharist, it doesn't matter how sinful he is. It matters for his soul, but it doesn't matter as far as the efficacy of the consecration of the Eucharist. And also, when he offers up the Mass, he's offering it on behalf of the Church and not on behalf of Father Fred. And so, in that regard, it doesn't matter. So this is one of those classic situations of yes and no. In one way, yes, in another way, no. And that brings us to the end of the 10 most interesting questions that St. Thomas Aquinas asks about the Eucharist and the Summa Theologia. So now, Sissel, I want you to, if you can remember all of those, let me see. Which one did you find the most interesting? Okay, and I also want to throw this out there to all you people. Now, Scott, thank you, because Scott's made a lot of comments during the thing. I know there's some people that are like, man, I don't care how many times you ask me, I'm not going to comment. Okay, I'm not going there.
It's okay. You can be a lurker.
You don't know who you don't know who I am, but I'm not going to comment. Okay, just throw me a bone, throw Sissel a bone, and say what did you find the most interesting? Okay, do you want to say which one you found the most interesting?
I'm very practical on a lot of things, so I think the ones that I find the most interesting were like ones like that last one about when if a bad priest is it less because that's an actual situation you could run into, and I think it's interesting to contemplate that. A lot of the questions, or at least how I interpreted the questions when you first read them, sometimes was not exactly what he was actually writing. So sometimes I would have a similar question, but it was actually more like, okay, once it's been consecrated, does it ever unconsecrate? Those are kind of questions I think about. He went a lot deeper than I did. He was going into like, does the essence is still there, or like the bread? I'm like,
yeah.
Bro, I'm just wanting that. But I think the very practical ones are good and stuff like that. And I think, honestly, when it comes to this stuff, yes, I do think that there's a chance you could overthink these things just a little bit. Like, I think you could go too far. However, there are also different personalities of people, and people have different things they're drawn to, like spiritually. And Aquinas, clearly his thing was always to be searching and asking questions that either he had or other people had to kind of get the answers for them. And there's some people who are, like you're mentioning, are just going to be like, I believe this, and they're not going to be thinking about 83 questions.
Yeah, and I think that the person that asks a lot of the questions can get to heaven, and the person that doesn't is going to as well. I think that people ask a lot of questions about a lot of less significant things,
Oh, sure.
About sports and why did the coach call that play and not the other play, and they sit there and they dissect it and they get into debates, and all right, nothing inherently wrong with that. But are we asking questions? Okay. Now, did you see the question about the stigmata came up again? Okay, because Scott Rogie is asking.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. I just missed that. That's hilarious.
Everybody is wondering whether or not I got the stigmata. Okay. When I was on Keith's show Tuesday morning, Tim asked the same thing. It actually used to look a lot more stigmatic than it does now. But no, I don't have the stigmata. Not nearly holy enough. And I think the stigmata would probably be on both palms. But
and it may not even be visible to us. We might not have even seen it, because a lot of saints, they other people couldn't see it. Only
really?
They could. Yeah, there's a few saints that couldn't.
So maybe I do actually have it here.
I'm just saying that, like, there's been a lot of times where other people could not see the stigmata. Only the saints have.
Oh, okay. But they felt it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't have the stigmata. And what happened was I was doing gardening last Saturday. I had a little shovel, or as my wife calls it, a spade. And I was trying to dig up weeds, and I pressed too hard on my palm, and I got a blister, and now it looks like I have the stigmata.
A little less cool than having the stigmata, so I'm not going to lie.
Right. Yeah, that's not quite as cool of a story, but anyways, I got to be honest, okay? And let's see, what else? I think that just about does it. Okay, so I'll throw out this question. If you were at the University of Paris in 1265, and you have St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure And,
Both of them.
and you're sitting around the courtyard, and you probably would not have been there, Sissel, unfortunately, because I think back then it would have probably only been seminarians, and I don't think this was like kind of open to the public. Although, interestingly, Plato was all for the education of both men and women together back in like in the 4th century BC. So this would have been a bunch of like seminarians getting together. And Aquinas is asking these questions, and they're like, they're debating it and they're discussing it, and I just wonder how, academically and spiritually stimulating that conversation would have been. And like I mentioned before, you have like these times in the history of philosophy where you have these folks that would gather around cafes and smoke cigarettes or pipes and drink wine or coffee and just discuss things. I guess if there's one thing that I would encourage or propose in this program that we have is maybe, just maybe, we need to do more of that. Maybe some of these questions you think it's ridiculous, but let's just at least discuss why it's ridiculous. I mean, because it actually did come out of the mind of the greatest philosopher and theologian the Catholic Church has ever produced. Some people may argue Augustine, but he's in the top 2 for sure. And if it was in St. Thomas Aquinas' mind, you might at least ask, why? I wonder why he thought that. Why was that important to him? And might that be, an opportunity for us to contemplate the Eucharist and keep our mind focused on what really is the source and summit of our Christian life, as the Catechism describes the Eucharist to be. So anyways, I hope you don't feel judged. I did not judge you.
I feel very
I judged
judged over
Sissel,
here.
but I didn't judge you.
Okay. We're doing great.
I judged Scott Rogie.
Oh, okay. By the way, the
oh, well, look at that. We got somebody else commenting.
Is it
Scott.
permissible to receive the Eucharist twice in one day?
Yes. Is it? Yeah. You absolutely can. And I believe the only qualification, and this would be a good question to raise to somebody like on Catholic Answers, but what I have heard, and I'm pretty certain, is that, let's say you go to Mass in the morning, and, let's say a classic example, you go to Saturday morning Mass, okay, and then you want to go to the Vigil for Sunday. Okay, so you Saturday evening,
right.
you receive again. Now that's one day, but really it's 2 days because in the church calendar it's 2.
Yeah.
But let's say you go to Mass at 6 o'clock at St. Monica, and then noon you find yourself at St. Jude Chapel at Mass again, and you receive again. No problem at all. Now the only thing that's I'd say an interesting question is, what if you showed up at the end of the Mass at St. Jude Chapel? You've already received the Eucharist once, and you're at the very end, and everybody's in line to receive the Eucharist. Can you go and just get in line and receive Jesus again in the Eucharist? I think you can, because what I've heard is that even like on a weekday, if you get to Mass, let's say, and it's in the Eucharistic prayer, and this actually happened to me, and you want to receive the Eucharist, you're in a state of grace. Well, you weren't required to go to Mass that day anyways.
God, it's
right?
only if you were late, super late to an actual Sunday obligation. Or Holy Day obligation.
An obligation Mass, and then you're late for a Mass that you were supposed to be at. And so, Daniel, thank you for the question. Scott says yes, but there are caveats to that. That is one of that. Okay, so I think he says that I answered the caveat. Okay, I think okay, Scott, thank you so much. All right, well, this has been a splendid show, if I might say so myself, and patting myself on the back.
Okay. All right, Dave comes back and he's just like, we're already to a splendid show status.
Yeah, I have an idea. Okay, we got a few more minutes,
okay.
And I want to throw this out at people, and I'm thinking very seriously, especially on my YouTube channel and maybe on this program as well. And so you tell me, and anybody out there, let me know if you think this is a good idea. I'm thinking, because the Summa is so vast.
Yes.
To take particular questions of the Summa. Remember, questions have articles.
Yes.
And let's say like question 1 of the Summa has to do with sacred doctrine, okay? And then kind of discuss what are the questions that St. Thomas Aquinas asks about sacred doctrine. So even though we may not be able to go in depth into all the answers, let's at least discuss what were the questions. And maybe just throwing the questions out that St. Thomas Aquinas asks without going into all the explanation of, oh, well, here's all the answers. Maybe just the very questions that he asks may stir up some conversation and some discussion in this show, okay? I think, you know what? I just made an executive decision. We're going to do that next week, okay?
Okay.
And we're gonna talk about sacred doctrine, and we're going to say what were the very first question of the Summa, what were the 10 questions, articles that Thomas asked about sacred doctrine? What is sacred doctrine? Okay. Do you remember what sacred doctrine is?
No, not at all.
Okay. Sacred doctrine would be as opposed to philosophy. Philosophy is what we can know through the light of human reason. That would be all the disciplines like chemistry and physics and biology and things like that. Sacred doctrine is that which we are provided by Holy Mother Church, God through Holy Mother Church, that is beyond the realm of what we can figure out on our own, okay? The teaching on the Trinity, the teaching on transubstantiation, like we talked about today, that's sacred doctrine, okay? We can't figure this out on our own. We have to be taught by the Church. The reality of heaven, hell, purgatory, the bodily assumption, the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Mother. This is all sacred doctrine. This is something that the Church proposes to us. It tells us about it, and then we either accept it or we don't accept it through faith, okay? Let's do that next week. I think that ought to be fun. Okay, thumbs up? 2 thumbs up.
I have no thumbs. Really quickly, Dave. Okay. I think it's a good idea. No, I think it's a great idea.
He's like, yeah, whatever. Whatever gets us out of this show. Okay, whatever.
No, I was going to say earlier you were saying that we need to sit around more and just talk and ask these questions. I don't know if it counts because we don't have cigarettes and we're not even in comfortable positions, but usually our young adult group, after we go out after our formation nights, we usually end up standing in a parking lot talking outside of a Culver's or a McDonald's or something, talking for a long time, and it does eventually turn philosophical. So maybe we might have milkshakes instead of cigars and pipes, but does that count?
Milkshakes. I can't imagine Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus sitting around a French cafe, drinking.
Who are not all 21.
Could I have another vanilla milkshake, please? Yeah, I don't think the milkshake. But you ever heard of the Vienna Circle?
Yes, I have.
Okay, Vienna Circle. These are philosophers. Man, let's redo that. Okay, maybe this show,
Dave,
we call this.
Can we start drinking whiskey when we're on this show?
Yeah, we call this the Las Colinas Circle. Okay? Yeah, I don't know. All right.
Y'all can join us. It's happy hour somewhere.
Okay.
By the way, Kimberly says hi.
All right. Kimberly is on. Okay.
And Mario says, because she said, it's good to have you back, Dave. I guess maybe that means no one liked.
Read into that. She's glad you're no longer part of this.
I will. I'm going to take it very personally.
In her own words, is in her rightful place. Okay? I didn't say it. I only repeated it.
Yes, because I can push Dave's buttons from back here. And also Mario says, was he lost and now he's found to you?
I was lost and now I'm found. Okay, Amazing Grace. All right, show's over. Thank you for the participation. Thank you for watching. And hey, if you're not on our email list, get on it quickly. Back to the Father at grnonline.com. Okay, we need to have a circle. We need to talk about important things. Okay, and we need your feedback. Okay, and you were not judged today. Sissa was, but you weren't. All right, goodbye.
Kimberly says I'm awesome, so.
Okay, God bless you. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.